The first thing Yarik Cole noticed when the shuttle doors opened was the heat. Not the kind of heat you complain about during a summer barbecue or when the AC breaks down in July. This was a thick, suffocating wall of air that pressed against his skin and made his lungs feel like they were breathing soup. His boots hit the cracked, rust-colored soil with a crunch, and the soles immediately started to soften under the relentless rays of the twin suns. "Welcome to Vesta 9, the alien said, its voice flat and metallic, without any inflection that would suggest pride or apology. Yarik adjusted the straps on his hydration pack and squinted through the shimmering haze. The landscape rippled in waves of distorted light. Blackened rocks dotted the terrain, and a few skeletal structures, long since warped by heat, jutted out of the ground like broken ribs. "You sure this is the spot?" he asked. The alien and envoy from the Thermari Union named Keswick tilted its head. "This is the only spot. No other delegation has survived more than 22 minutes on the surface." Yarik checked his watch, 1 minute and 40 seconds. His shirt was already sticking to him like wet gauze. "Why are we even here again?" he muttered to himself. Keswick's wide, pale eyes blinked slowly. "To prove your species' viability for joint habitation protocols. If you can tolerate Vesta 9, the Thermari will consider Earth for exchange programs." "Right, cultural diplomacy. You volunteered." "Yeah," Yarik said, dragging his duffel bag behind him as he trudged toward the temporary outpost. "I was told this would be like Death Valley. You know, a little dry heat, maybe a tan." Keswick stared at him, unmoving. "Your humor continues to perplex. Get used to it." The outpost was a boxy, prefab shelter with solar panels that shimmered like fish scales in the brutal light. Yarik stepped inside and immediately peeled off his outer jacket. The thermometer on the wall read 155 degrees Fahrenheit. "Feels like Miami in June," he said, rubbing his forehead with the back of his wrist. Keswick tapped on a narrow screen embedded in its wrist. "You have remained conscious for 3 minutes. This exceeds previous records." Yarik collapsed onto a bench, his breath shallow. "Don't hand me a medal yet. I think my eyebrows just melted." The alien's head swiveled. "You have not begun hallucinating." "Not yet, but you keep talking and that might change." Keswick's species, the Thermari, had long considered Vesta 9 a cursed anomaly in their colonization archives. The planet orbited close to a binary star system. Soil temperatures reached over 180 degrees by midday. Atmospheric humidity was nearly zero. No water, no shade, and the air was laced with ionized particles that made electronics short out unless heavily shielded. Previous species Cranari, Vulak, even the notoriously heat-resistant Hamanth had all tried brief excursions. All had retreated within minutes, citing unlivable conditions. And yet Yarik, a 34-year-old man from St. Louis who once passed out during a sauna d'air, was now sipping tepid electrolyte water in a fold-out chair like he was waiting for someone to bring him a beach umbrella. "Your kind continues to mystify," Keswick said, watching as Yarik stretched out on the bench. Yarik reached into his bag and pulled out a small plastic container. "Want to see something really crazy?" he asked. Keswick leaned in cautiously. Yarik opened the lid to reveal a stack of thin, round discs. "Pancakes," he said proudly, "dried, rehydrated with water." "I brought syrup too, but it's probably boiling in my pack. You intend to eat in this environment?" Keswick asked, as though he'd suggested chewing on uranium. "I've hiked the Mojave in August. This is just a bit more intense. Your physiology should be shutting down." "Yeah, well." "Humans are stubborn." Keswick blinked again. "We have no translation for that word, figures." Within the first hour, the soles of Yarik's boots had started to delaminate. He wrapped his feet in fireproof foil sheets and kept moving, exploring the perimeter of the outpost. He took notes, measured soil samples, even tried to set up a collapsible hammock. By the third hour, his heart rate had doubled, and his body was pushing the boundary between determination and heatstroke. Keswick urged him to return, but he waved it off and applied another slather of zinc cream to his face. Just need to pace myself, he said, his voice hoarse. You are exhibiting signs of organ stress. We should initiate extraction. Nope, I haven't even cracked open the beach ball yet. You brought recreational implements. Yarik pulled a deflated rubber ball from his bag and blew it up slowly, the sweat on his brow dripping in rhythmic taps onto the ground. Sand, son, no lifeguards. This is just a poorly advertised vacation. Keswick stood silently, its internal systems running diagnostics it barely trusted. Every record said this should not be happening. Yet here was a human, dehydrated, exhausted, and borderline hallucinating, but still functioning, still smiling. Still cracking jokes about sunburns and margaritas. At the 6-hour mark, Yarik collapsed. The medics, who had been on standby in orbit, rushed down in a shuttle. He was unconscious, pulse erratic, skin the color of boiled shrimp. The crew rushed him into a pressurized chamber and began immediate cooling protocols. He should not have lasted this long, one Thermari medic whispered. His organs are damaged, yes, but recoverable. That is impossible. Keswick stood at the observation window, watching the human's chest rise and fall under the influence of forced oxygen. No, Keswick said, it is not impossible, it is human. Yarik regained consciousness 2 days later. His throat was dry and every joint ached like he'd been spun in a dryer filled with bricks. Good morning, beach bum, a voice said. He turned his head slowly. A woman in a navy blue jumpsuit stood beside him, arms crossed. Her name tag read Daria Selden. You're the one who thought Vesta 9 was a good spot for a picnic, she asked. Not my best idea, Yarik croaked. You suffered second-degree burns, dehydration, and minor kidney trauma. You've been out for 48 hours. He tried to sit up but winced. How bad? Bad enough. But you'll recover. Slowly. You're lucky we had a med pod tuned for human biology. Keswick entered the room, its long limbs folding neatly as it stood beside Daria. Your actions have shifted Thermari policy, it said. We now consider your species uniquely viable for extreme environments. Exchange protocols are being drafted. Yarik blinked. So, that means Earth's on the table? It is being reconsidered. Your resilience defies our models. We must now account for human variability. Daria smirked. Variability, that's one word for it. Yarik smiled faintly. Hey. Did someone grab my beach ball? Keswick turned to Daria. Is this a priority item, apparently? I will retrieve it. As Keswick exited, Daria leaned closer. You know, most people bring scientific equipment. You brought pancakes and a ball. Didn't have time to pack a margarita blender, she shook her head. You're lucky you didn't die. Yeah, he said softly. But if I had, it would have been one hell of a tan, she laughed despite herself. He spent the next 3 weeks in recovery. His muscles atrophied slightly, and the burns required daily treatment. He couldn't walk more than 20 feet without needing rest, and his appetite didn't return for days. But the medics were thorough, and by the end of the 4th week, he was doing short treadmill sessions. Keswick visited often, sometimes just to watch him do breathing exercises. You continue to heal, it observed. Most of our species would not have survived the exposure time you endured. Yarik sipped water slowly. You said nobody lasted more than 20 minutes before. That is correct. And I was out there for 6 hours. Yes, you are statistically anomalous. I'm from Missouri. We thrive on bad decisions. Keswick tilted its head. I have begun compiling a new database, Human Heat Endurance. Your entry is singular, Yarik nodded. Make sure you add the part about the pancakes. By the time he was cleared for active movement, the Thermari Union had formalized a new designation for Earth, Strategic Adaptive Species. Not because humans were the strongest or smartest, but because they were the most stubbornly unwilling to die when logic said they should. Yarik didn't return to Vesta 9. His next mission was on a water-rich moon orbiting a gas giant, where humidity was a bigger issue than heat. But his name stayed on the Thermari records, and so did the footage. A human in foil-wrapped boots, tossing a beach ball into the scalding wind while laughing like he was on vacation. The official Thermari report called it behavioral aberration. The humans called it summer. By the 5th week, Yarik could walk the full circumference of the medical deck without collapsing, provided he took breaks and didn't attempt stairs. He was still under mandatory monitoring, but the medics had stopped hovering. He was upright, coherent, and by Thermari standards an anomaly worth studying in person. The observation deck above the medical bay had gradually filled with a rotation of Thermari biologists, xenopsychologists, and one planetary ecologist, who couldn't stop blinking when Yarik demonstrated how to use a resistance band. They never interrupted. They just watched, wide-eyed, logging everything from how he adjusted his breathing post-exertion to how often he scratched his nose. He waved at them once. None waved back. By the afternoon of day 36, he was cleared for limited off-deck movement. "Restricted to internal climate zones, no open sun environments," said the attending officer, a squat humanoid named Drin with a voice like gravel in a tin can. "And you will wear this tracker." The band clamped onto his wrist with a click. "Feels very house arrest why," Yarik said. Drin didn't so much as look up. "It will alert medical staff if your vitals drop below survivability thresholds." Yarik glanced at the tiny display on the band. "You mean if I die, correct?" The lift doors opened with a soft shudder, revealing a corridor lined with iridescent panels that shimmered when he walked past them. He followed the path until it bent into a communal research chamber filled with Thermari seated at low tables, each with multiple limbs manipulating various instruments. None acknowledged him at first. Then a familiar figure turned from a console. "You are ambulatory," said Keswick. "Barely," Yarik said. "I'm told I'm not allowed to go anywhere interesting. Your definition of interesting is medically irresponsible." "Fair." Keswick gestured to an open seat beside a translucent display. "We are reviewing data from your exposure." "Would you like to contribute?" Yarik sat slowly, adjusting the backrest. "Sure, long as it doesn't involve walking into a volcano." The display flickered to life, showing thermal maps, electrolyte depletion charts, and a pulsing diagram of his nervous system during his time on Vesta 9. One of the Thermari across the table turned to him, its voice higher pitched than Keswick's. "You should have entered synaptic failure after the 3rd hour. Your hydration levels were unsustainable." "I had a lot of salt tabs," Yarik said. "Not sufficient." "Well, no, but I also just really didn't want to be wrong." The Thermari blinked twice. "This is not a survival factor. For humans it kind of is." Keswick tapped the console. "We are attempting to model your stress response." Your adrenal system spiked repeatedly but without the expected collapse. Yarik leaned forward. "We call that stubbornness or stupidity. Depends who you ask." Another Thermari, this one with a fractured cranial ridge, peered over its instrument. "Your brain maintained executive function under conditions that should have triggered shutdown." "What were you thinking about?" "I dunno," Yarik said. "Mostly pancakes, and how I hadn't told my brother where I left the spare key to my apartment. Also whether the beach ball would melt." The Thermari conferred in hushed clicks. Then one turned back. "You were experiencing hallucinations." "No, I was just bored." Keswick folded its limbs. "We have not accounted for this in our models." "Boredom?" "Yes. We assumed pain or despair would dominate cognitive activity." "Yeah, no, you can't maintain despair for 6 hours straight without a snack." The group fell into silence. Keswick's interface flickered again. "We must revise our psychological frameworks." Yarik tapped the edge of the display. "You ever study Earth Kids on long car rides? That'll teach you more about human endurance than any medical scanner." Later that evening, Yarik was escorted to the observation dome, a place usually reserved for diplomatic visitors or high-ranking Thermari. It overlooked the quarantine ring of Vesta 9 from orbit, a massive arc of reinforced satellites keeping the planet's atmospheric ionization from interfering with ship systems. The view was beautiful in a brutal way. Twin suns low on the horizon like a pair of dying coals. The planet's surface shimmered with residual heat, even in shadow. He stood by the curved window, arms folded when Keswick entered behind him. "Your presence here has caused procedural disruption," it said without preamble. "That's my specialty." The Thermari High Assembly has commissioned a new category of environmental resilience. You are listed as the primary reference point. Do I get a badge? No, a designation, category human class adaptive. Yarik turned, eyebrows raised. "I sound like a refrigerator." Keswick hesitated. "Is that desirable? Not really, but I'll take it." The silence stretched. Then Keswick walked to the window, joining him. "We once believed life could only persist within narrow parameters. Our own evolution was shaped by thermal constancy. We did not adapt, we perfected containment. Must have been a boring childhood." "It was efficient." "Same thing." Keswick's eyes pulsed faintly. "You did not survive because of superior biology. You survived because you refused not to. That's humanity in a nutshell." "There is still confusion," Keswick said. "We wish to understand your internal reasoning. Why did you not retreat?" Yarik watched the planet slowly rotate beneath them. "Because someone had to go first. And I figured if I failed, at least it'd be funny." Keswick tilted its head. "You risked death for future amusement." "Not exactly. But if I made it, then the next person wouldn't be walking into the unknown, they'd be walking into a story." A long pause followed. Then Keswick turned away from the window. "There is another simulation, of Vesta?" "No, of a location on your planet. It is a desert called," Keswick paused, searching the Lut Desert. "Iran. One of the hottest places we've recorded." "Yes. We wish to test human adaptability in a controlled replication. Would you consent to advising?" Yarik blinked. "I thought I was still under medical recovery." "You are. But your insights may reduce casualties." "Is that supposed to be comforting?" "We believe you would prefer involvement to inaction." He couldn't argue with that. "Fine," he said, stepping back from the window, "but I'm picking the music this time." Keswick didn't respond. It probably didn't know what music was or why it mattered. But it nodded. 3 days later, Yarik stood in a domed simulation chamber, watching the artificial sun ramp up. The terrain had been replicated down to the mineral content of the sand. He wasn't going in, not this time, but a young woman from the Andoran delegation was. Her physiology was closer to baseline human than most species, and she'd volunteered after reading the translated report on Yarik's time on Vesta 9. She was tall, with bronze skin and braided hair wrapped in a thick scarf. No armor, just layered fabric and a hydration weave suit. "You sure you're ready for this?" Yarik asked from the observation deck. She nodded. "If you could do it, so can I," he winced. "That's a dangerous motto." She smiled, calm, focused, and stepped through the threshold. The heat hit immediately, but she didn't flinch. Within the first 10 minutes, her heart rate stabilized. At 15, she adjusted her water intake without prompting. At 20, she sat on a rock to rest, eyes closed, breathing slow. "She's doing better than I did," Yarik muttered. Keswick stood beside him. "She had your data." "Your strategy?" "I didn't have a strategy." "Your improvisation, then." He watched the woman raise a hand, shading her eyes as she scanned the horizon. She wasn't panicking. She wasn't overheating. She was adapting. "She'll make it," he said quietly. Keswick didn't answer. It didn't need to. As the timer hit 30 minutes, the test concluded. The chamber cooled. The woman emerged upright, her breathing even. "She will be the first of many," Keswick said. "Good," Yarik said. "Means I don't have to go back in there." "There is another candidate in rotation. He insists on testing the effects of chili pepper consumption in high-heat environments." Yarik blinked. "He's human, isn't he?" "Yes," he rubbed his eyes. "I don't know whether to be proud or apologize." "You may do both." And for a long moment, they stood in silence, watching the chamber reset. The future, it seemed, would be full of humans doing things no one asked them to do for reasons no one else could quite understand. Yarik stood barefoot on the polished composite floor of the Thermari biofeedback chamber, gingerly raising one arm while a low-frequency buzz drifted from the surrounding walls. The chamber lights adjusted automatically to his skin tone, compensating for the uneven blotches still healing across his shoulders. A thin mist sprayed from the ceiling rehydration vapor with a neutral pH, meant to prevent skin cracking during muscular reactivation. "Hold the position," said a voice from the speaker grid. "I'm holding," Yarik grunted, "but if my shoulder falls off, I'm blaming your entire species. The joint is stable. Ligament regeneration is proceeding at 72%. That's not as comforting as you think it is." He shifted his weight carefully, feeling the tension ripple through his thighs. His left calf still twitched involuntarily when he stood too long, a result of prolonged vasodilation during the last hour on Vesta 9. The Thermari had argued against walking unaided this soon, but he insisted. If his body was functional, it should feel functional. A narrow panel rotated out from the wall and extended toward him. "Place your hand on the plate." Yarik pressed his palm flat against the cool surface. A faint pulse of light scanned his fingerprints, then shifted to a deeper spectrum, analyzing dermal hydration and electrolyte distribution. "Your sodium retention is high," came the voice again. "You consumed salted foods this morning, boiled eggs and pickles," he said. "Don't judge me. Judgment is not part of the protocol, then you're missing out." The wall retreated back into the chamber. A side door hissed open and Keswick entered silently, its elongated limbs moving with practiced fluidity. It observed him for a moment, then walked around to his left side. "You are favoring the leg," Keswick noted. "Only when you're watching, you should rest." "I've been resting." "When I sleep, I dream about physical therapy," Keswick paused. "Humans dream during sleep." "Yeah, sometimes it's just my grandmother yelling at me to fix the porch roof. Sometimes it's Vesta 9, but with barbecue grills." Keswick blinked slowly. "You experienced thermal trauma, yet your subconscious associates it with leisure." "Not really. But the brain's weird when it's recovering." Keswick moved to the control panel and adjusted the ambient temperature by 2 degrees. Yarik exhaled slowly, grateful for the slight drop. "We received inquiries from the Thermari delegation," said Keswick. "They wish to conduct a comparative study using your Vesta 9 data." "What, they want to try it themselves?" "No, they wish to build a simulation of Earth's Mojave Desert and test their own personnel." Yarik raised an eyebrow. "They're going to simulate my planet to test themselves. They believe Earth may offer insights into high adaptability training. That's a twist. Your behavior has prompted a shift in how adaptability is defined. The term now incorporates behavioral unpredictability," he chuckled. "You're welcome." Later that same day, Yarik sat in the communal observation lounge with a cooling sleeve wrapped around his right knee. His hydration pack was clipped to the seat beside him, and he was chewing a tasteless Thermari protein bar that had the consistency of uncooked drywall. Across the table sat a species he hadn't met before, a tripedal, translucent-skinned, being introduced only as Lure. Lure had heard about the Vesta 9 incident, of course. Everyone had. "You willingly entered a Class K exposure zone," Lure said, its tone somewhere between awe and confusion. "I signed a waiver. And you remained conscious beyond the cellular degradation window." "Barely, but yeah." Lure's upper appendage twitched. "We have no behavioral template for that decision." Yarik took another bite of the bar, then spoke through the chew. "I didn't do it to prove anything. I just didn't think it was that different from other bad ideas I've had." "You equated it to prior experience?" "Sure. I once hiked through a dust storm because I thought the rental car was only a little further." Lure's membrane pulsed faintly. "Your species applies flawed logic to decision-making?" "Constantly." That night, after the lights dimmed on the lower decks and most of the Thermari returned to their nutrient chambers, Yarik sat alone in the recovery garden. It was a small domed space near the ship's lower gravity section, filled with bioluminescent plants and soft, synthetic moss. The gravity was set to 80% Earth norm, which helped reduce stress on his joints. Keswick joined him without a word and sat on the opposite bench. The silence stretched comfortably. I used to think resilience was about ignoring pain, Yarik said eventually, but it's not. It's about knowing pain's coming and deciding to keep going anyway. Keswick didn't answer right away. Then, you view survival as a decision, not always. But sometimes, yeah, when it's close, it comes down to a choice. We do not understand that, I know. They watched the glowing plants sway gently in the recycled air. I reviewed your neural data, Keswick said. There was a moment 3 hours into exposure where your pain index peaked. Most species would have entered terminal shock, but your brain activity showed. Laughter. Yarik leaned back. I remembered this dumb joke my friend told me in college about a camel and a vending machine. No idea why it popped into my head. That neural response contributed to your survival. So, my friend saved my life with a terrible joke, unintentionally, yes, Yarik chuckled. Don't tell him that. He'll never shut up about it. They sat in silence again, the garden humming quietly around them. When the final medical report was released a few days later, Yarik read through it with a mixture of pride and disbelief. His cardiovascular system had narrowly avoided permanent damage. His kidneys had required partial filtration support for 6 days. His skin would never fully recover from the micro-blistering on his upper back. But he was alive, functionally whole, and according to the Thermari, a data point that shifted the baseline for what intelligent life could endure. Keswick entered his quarters an hour after the report was signed off. You are cleared for full activity, it said. Within temperature-regulated zones. Guess I'm officially back in the workforce. There is a ceremony scheduled. Recognition for your contribution. Do I have to wear anything formal? No clothing requirements exist. However, the High Assembly wishes to present you with a symbolic artifact. Yarik arched an eyebrow. A medal, a rock, from Vesta 9. Recovered from the location where you collapsed, he snorted. You guys are learning from humans. That's the most sentimental thing I've heard all cycle. Keswick tilted its head. We are attempting to understand your species. Symbolic gestures appear to aid emotional integration. It's working. The ceremony itself was brief. No fanfare, no speeches. Just a small gathering in the arboretum, a handoff of the heat-scorched stone, and a nod from the High Assembly's representative. Yarik held the rock in one hand, feeling its rough, pitted surface like a scar that had turned to stone. Later, in the privacy of his quarters, he placed it on the shelf beside his electrolyte flask, and the now deflated beach ball still slightly melted on one side. Keswick appeared at the doorway. Do you require additional assistance? No, Yarik said, sitting on the edge of the bed. I just need to figure out what comes next. Keswick regarded him for a moment. You have altered how we interpret survival. That is not insignificant. Feels like I just fell down in the desert and made it weird for everyone. Sometimes, disruption is the beginning of understanding. Yarik nodded. You're getting better at this whole talking like a human thing. We are adapting. He lay back, staring at the ceiling, breathing evenly for the first time in weeks. There were no more probes to endure, no more simulations, no more tests to fail. Just a quiet room, a battered body, and a story no one else could have written. He closed his eyes. For the first time since Vesta 9, he didn't dream about heat.